So there are some Photopea tutorials that I actually found on the web. I don't know if you guys looked at these yet. These are a couple of different ways that the authors of these are using masking. Feel free to use them as a resource. This is the demonstration that I actually did in one of my other classes the other day. And then I'm going to record this one and add that as well. So you'll have a lot of resources to look at. I did drop in a basic editing into, this is just a Google Doc. It's written for Photoshop, but we know that for the most part, Photoshop and Photopea are very similar, if not identical in some ways. So you can use this as a guide. Let's say you need to crop your pictures beforehand, or you need to do something like add brightness and contrast. It's just an overview of basic editing. Plus, it does have layer masking in there, and that is what I'm going to review with you today. All right, so if you guys are just dropping into the meeting and you don't have your focal point pictures added to Classroom, make sure you work on those first. That you need to have those pictures first before you go on to this assignment that I'm showing that says the editing using layer masks in photopea.com. All right, so again, there's multiple video resources. My slideshow again is going to remind you of how to create focal point. And then the link to Photopea is here. So I'm going to get that open so that it's ready to go. And I already have a picture open in my drive that I know I want to use that's showing a pretty strong focal point. So I'm going to pop over to my drive. I already have this shot picked out from earlier today. And I know that the car is my strong focal point here. So that's going to work well when I do the layer masking. So if you guys have your work and you're drawing it out of your Google Drive, then you're going to need to download those pictures first. And I'm going to the download button here in the upper right. And this picture was called Asymmetry earlier. That's okay. It's fine if you want to keep your stuff in your downloads folder. It may go there automatically. However, if you guys notice, I have a school stuff folder and my work is always going into there. You can specify your work going into whatever folder you would like. Just remember where you're putting stuff so that you can retrieve it when you need to. I know that you guys on the left sidebar here probably have a folder called Pictures. That's always makes sense to put it in there because obviously we're working with pictures. But otherwise, where to store your work is up to you. So I'm going to just save it in my school stuff, because then I need to go to Photopea, and once it's downloaded and saved, then I'm going to File, Open. And I know it was my asymmetry picture. I'm going to go ahead and upload it. And there we go. Now, I don't know for you guys, but this has been like a reoccurring problem for me. I've been trying to edit in Photopea all week on my Mac, and I keep getting this message that is talking about advertising, and I don't do the paid version, right? None of us do the paid version of Photopea. You can just do okay. There's probably something somewhere on my internet that I have to like unblock or something for that, and I didn't bother figuring it out yet. So remember, always look at your layers palette as you're doing work. This is the background layer, just the plain picture, nothing else yet. We're going to be looking at the tools down here in the layers palette. So of course we have the trash can, we have the new layer button, we have groups. It's called groups in Photoshop. They just call it new folder in Photopea. I don't use them a whole lot, but they are there. And then one thing that we're really going to be using is we're going to be using adjustment layers. So I always refer to it as the black and white cookie. Really what it is it's called the adjustment layers. It is the circle that's half filled in and half empty. So these are adjustment layers. And the great thing about adjustment layers is they're going to help you do something called non-destructive editing. In other words, we can apply all kinds of effects to this picture and we won't ever change the original background layer when we're using adjustment layers. So I'm going to go ahead and first do click on the adjustment layers because there's really a whole menu of things that you can work on here. And you've got some effects that primarily are in this third box, and I'm probably going to start with one of these. Brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure. Those are all basic corrections that you can use. And you guys can feel free to experiment with any of these fills if you would like to. I also use invert a lot when I show my students how to do this. But there's some funky effects like posterize you might really like. So really when you're doing this work, we're going to practice it this week. It'll also take us into next week because I'm going to have you work on probably about 5 files. You'll have a lot to experiment with here. So just today, to be straightforward, I'm going to do a black and white conversion. You can do a black and white conversion with 2 of these adjustment layers. Of course, you can go to black and white and do it, but Channel Mixer will also give you a different kind of version of black and white. In other words, it will change those gray values depending on what colors the image already contains. And if I just click on black and white straight out, you'll be able to see what I mean. So the degree of gray values is dependent upon the colors that are already contained in the image. And I know I have a lot of green. So if I want to go ahead and customize this, I can click on my green slider. Anything that is green in the image, you're going to see those gray values shift. Now, in Photoshop, it's a little bit more sophisticated because you actually have some presets you can use. Photopea does not give us the presets. We just have the ability to customize. But feel free to play around with these sliders. That's your choice. I'm just going to leave it straightforward like this. And I want to close this window just to get that out of the way. So as we look at our layers palette, when you're looking at your adjustment layers, you have 2 different things here. You have the adjustment itself, which you can click on and re-edit. I actually did a double click and it brought the ability to re-edit that black and white again if I want to. All right, let's close again. And the other thing you have is you have a little white thumbnail that is considered the mask. So all of your adjustment layers come with these white masks. And when you're doing the, we're going to actually work with the brush tool because those masks work together with the brush tool. I'm going to click right on that little white thumbnail. And if you noticed, there's a little white frame that bounced over from the black and white to the mask itself. That's where we want that little dotted white frame to be. We want it to be on the white thumbnail, or in other words, the mask. Then we know we're going to be able to do some brushing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my brush tool. The shortcut for your brush tool is the letter B. It'll put you right into the brush tool on your keyboard if you hit that. And the other thing we have to check with our brush tool is that we have the default colors black and white. So as you look at your foreground and background colors, when you're looking at that little D, when you click on that, it just means it's bringing you back to default black and white. So if you had other colors here from the last time you worked in Photopea, like red and purple, clicking on the letter D brings you back to default black and white. The other thing that you'll notice is there's a little set of arrows going up and down. It just means you can swap the colors from background to foreground. So if I actually need the foreground color to be black, so I just did my swap. Black is now my foreground color. white is going to be my background color. So your brush is always going to brush with whatever the foreground color is. In this case, it's black. And basically, we've got a little bit of a rhyme that we can use to try to help us remember this. Black is going to reveal the color underneath, and white is going to conceal. So at this point, because the mask is fully white, it is concealing all the color, right? It is just letting that adjustment rest on top without seeing any of the color underneath. And if I want to start brushing and looking at the color underneath, I need to do that with the black brush. So I have black set here. I know I have my brush tool. And I should probably just check to see what size my brush is, because I want to actually brush the green car back. My brush is actually so small I can barely see it. All right, so it's about 15 pixels. The shortcut for your brush tool on your keyboard is your right and left bracket. So if I bracket with a right bracket, my brush will get bigger. If I hit the bracket key and go a little bit smaller, the left bracket, my brush will shrink down. So I'm going to actually work with somewhat of a large brush here, just in the middle. And I want to bring back that color. Boy, that's a pain in the neck. So on the inside of this shape of the car, I can brush fairly large. You're going to find that you need to change your brush sizes often. Boy, I'm very glitchy today. I apologize for that. In fact, I actually just got a big swath up here that I didn't mean to get. Yeah, like a whole big one. Okay. This is actually okay because I'm going to be able to show you guys how to reverse this stuff. Of course, if you make a mistake, you can always go to the edit menu and you can step backwards or undo. So that was good. That actually took a lot of that junk away. And I'm going to keep brushing within the car. Oh, sorry guys. Hopefully this won't be as challenging as it is for me right now when you guys go and do your work. Okay, so we know we can go to the edit menu and undo that. The other way that you can get rid of brushing that you might not necessarily have meant to do is to also switch your colors. So if I hit the swap arrows here, now white is going to be my foreground color. And white in some ways acts as an eraser, so I can brush with a white brush and it will, again, mask any of the color that I do not wish to have in the image. So I can just brush that away. That's the other way to do it. So I think as I know that when I do layer masking, I'm constantly switching from black to white in order to either mask or unmask whatever adjustment I'm trying to work with. So the other thing that you should do when you are doing your masking work is you should also zoom in. You're especially going to want to see the edges of whatever object you're brushing so that you know everything is nice and clean. And one thing I like to have out for that is the navigator, and you can find that under the window menu. When you bring up your navigator, you do get a little slider here that is going to let you zoom. You can also click and drag this red box around the edges of your object as you do your work. So it's really essential that number one, you zoom in, and number two, that you're using the appropriate brush size. Obviously, this brush is pretty large and it works well if I'm brushing, in the center of this image. But as I go to um, the edges, I definitely have to shrink my brush down because the brush is going to be way too big and I'm going to end up kind of going outside the lines here. So I'm going to shrink my brush down with my left bracket tool. That's going to let me go along my edges a little bit more carefully. Okay, so I'm not going to continue, but I think you guys get the basic idea here. You want to keep your eye on your mask so that you've got the frame around it as you're working with your brush tool and you're switching from black or white. So my suggestion is to save often. And I'm going to go to the file menu. And I think because we're working with these individual layers, it will be important to save your work as a PSD file. PSD files mean they're Photoshop files. They will open in Photopea or Photoshop. You guys are probably on, if you're working on your school device, obviously you're going to have to save the file in your pictures folder. It might tell you that it's not, like, you don't have a program on your school device to open it, but save it anyway because you can save them. You'll just have to upload it into Photopea to continue working on it. If you put these documents in your drive, that's okay too. When you download them, you'll be able to open them in either Photoshop at school or Photopea at home. So don't worry if it gives you a message about like not being able to read the device on your school computer. Obviously, you guys don't have the software loaded onto the machine. It's going to be online or at school. So saving as a PSD is going to download that picture. And it's also going to retain all those individual layers because you want to be able to go back and continue to edit individual layers. We also have the ability to export them as JPEGs, but you have to remember that when you do export as a JPEG, it is going to flatten all those layers and you will not have the ability to go back and edit those anymore once you export as a JPEG and all the layers get flattened. So primarily, I would like you guys to save them as PSD files. Then you can continue to edit as you go. And I had a conversation with some of my students earlier this week about saving because we had the power going out and whatnot earlier. Save often. If you're saving every 5 or 10 minutes and maybe your computer dies, well, if you've saved every 5 or 10 minutes, you're only losing 5 or 10 minutes of work. If you're working on something for 45 minutes and you haven't saved it, then you risk losing 45 minutes of work. And then it's just that much longer to, go back and redo everything. So that's why I always say to save often. So having said all that, that's basically in a nutshell how you do your